Welcome to Gardener's Growplace, with tips to help you be more successful in your house, yard, and garden. Here's the host of Gardener's Growplace, Henry Vaughn.
Welcome to Gardener's Growplace. Boy, we have a beautiful show in store for you today. We're going to be looking at two different aspects. One, this pond doesn't just happen by accident. There are some things that we have to do in the summertime to get that clear water in the background, to get all these fish that are active around us, to get the water hyacinths and the water lettuce blooming. Doesn't happen by accident. We're going to look at some of those steps so we get this prettiness. But you know what? We have work to do in the fall season. We can't wait until next spring to do some of the fall shutdown, to do some of the cleanup. We have to get rid of some of these plants or we're going to have a mess and green water next spring, and that's not what we want. Stay tuned for this show. We'll give you some of those tips. We'll be right back for more of Gardener's Growplace.
Enjoy beautiful fall color and plenty of shade every summer with the huge shipment of shade trees now in stock at Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace. Choose from high-quality maples, flowering pears, clump birches, sweet gums, weeping willows, pin oaks, and many more. These 6 to 8 foot shade trees are guaranteed to grow, starting at just $29.99. Get Evergreen's extended 18-month warranty free with your purchase of root stimulator and planting mix to get your tree started right. Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace now in 4 locations: Kingsport, Colonial Heights, Bristol, and on the web at egardenplace.com.
Old-fashioned service for your modern world. Bill Bachman Toyota.
Come to Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace for colorful pansy power. Choose the really big, majestic giants for blooms up to 4 inches across. How about Evergreen's all-time favorite, bingo pansies with a garden full of bright pansy faces? Or cheerful violas or Johnny jump-ups, just like in Grandma's country garden. And the all-new baby bingos that combine bingo's faces with viola's hardiness. Feed them with Fertilome rooting and blooming mix for color this fall, winter, and spring, too. It's pansy power for 3 seasons of color from Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace.
Visit Gifts and Collectibles at the Colonial Heights Pharmacy for our region's best selection of every collectible you can imagine. The Gifts and Collectibles showroom boasts wonderful names such as Swarovski, Buyer's Choice, Christopher Radko, Department 56, and many more of the most respected brands in the world of collectibles. Come by and fill your world with the gifts you love, or present the ones you love with art, beauty, and elegance from Gifts and Collectibles in Colonial Heights.
Welcome back to Gardener's Growplace. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mike is a water garden enthusiast, has ponds at home, and helps customers on a daily basis to get nice, good, clean water and get this nice plant coverage that we have to get good ponds.
I think everybody would like a pond like this. I have a small pond, but it's nothing like this. The plants, you can see how pretty and green everything is and how clear the water is, but like you said, it didn't happen by accident. There's a lot of things that go into a pretty pond in the summer. Let's step back in time a bit, a few short months ago, and look at what the pond looked like.
As we mentioned earlier, we're going to be in the ponds talking to you about water garden plants. And Mike, look what we've got here. Tell us something about these plants.
I've got a beautiful pond here, Lee, but it needs a little bit of maintenance. What you're looking at are water lilies. That's what everybody wants in a pond, water lilies and water lotus. I'll show you the difference here in a minute. As you can see from the previous clip, the pond really has come a long way.
Mike, actually, my brother Lee was with you in the pond at that time earlier this summer season, so I didn't really see how bad it really looked. What were the 2 or 3 steps that you took to get the water this clean and to get this coverage over top?
The problems with the nutrients that the pond had in the spring caused all the trouble. All that green water was caused by the algae growing in it because there was a lot of nutrients. The fish over the winter, dead plants, things that blow into your pond, all that lays on the bottom and rots. And then in the spring when the water warms up and it starts to overturn, all those nutrients boil up and the algae just go crazy.
That's when you get the algae bloom.
That's the algae bloom. You can see how many plants there are now, but back in the spring there may have been only 10% coverage. There were just a few of the hardier plants, the water lilies and some of the marginal plants that were starting to grow. The big difference, the big change has come from these plants. The floating plants, these are tropical plants, the hyacinths and the water lettuce. And you can see all the root mass that they have, and they have a tendency to trap all of the little pieces of sand and things that float around in the water. Plus they absorb the nutrients, and on top, added benefit is they shade the pond so the algae doesn't get a foothold in the first place.
As you can see, if you look at the base of these plants and you shake those dirty roots, you can see all the residue and the fine things that they filtered out. You can just imagine with all the plants on top of the pond how much dirt that takes out of the water system. But Mike, the filtration really takes place in that top pond over there.
The upper pond acts like a settling pool. All the silt and debris collects up there. The pump is in the deep part here, but with all the fish and the activity in this pond, it doesn't settle out near as much as it does up there. Let's have a closer look. Let's have a look at these roots. Gosh, I mean, look at that. Look at all that stuff down in there.
Boy, that really shows how much silt those roots can trap.
Unbelievable.
And that's where your major filter is going to come, it's this top pond.
Look at how thick the mat of plants is. Look at all of this stuff. Now, this is your filtration system right here. No matter what kind of pump or box filter you have, with this many plants, this is what's actually doing the filtration. You can see how dark and luscious green it's almost thick enough you could stand on it.
Hey Mike, how often are you supposed to take some of these plants out? Because if you take some plants out, you remove a bunch of the filth and the silt that's on there, and then you're going to have new plants that are going to continue to grow. At some point, it's just not going to grow anymore.
Well, you've got a couple of choices. If you want to leave the plants alone and they're not getting disturbed and are actually absorbing the nutrients that are attached to their roots, they're going to grow exponentially. You know, mid-July, they're just going to take off, and you'd have trouble keeping plants out of here. You'd have to do it every day. By doing that, you're actually you're exporting nutrients from the pond. You could do the same thing in a pond without plants by doing major water changes. You're still removing the nutrients, but the plants are easy to pluck out than it is to filter out, you know, very fine particles in the water.
So these are plants that are tropical, so they are going to die as soon as you have your first hard frost or hard freeze. So then what keeps that working during the wintertime?
Well, actually, the tropical plants will start shutting down when the temperature gets below about 50 degrees.
So not 32.
Even when you get some cool nights, they will begin to slow and stop growing. They'll quit blooming. They'll start to get this burnished bronze look on the foliage where they're getting hardened off. You can see the difference between this leaf and a newer one that's come out since the last cool spell we've had. The water lettuce are the first to go. But once these plants reach that critical cool water or cool air temperature stage, they probably won't pull out for the winter. If you decide that you want to try to overwinter some of your tropicals, you have to get them in before the temperatures drop below 50.
But if you leave them in the pond, then we're going to have a big mess next spring.
Yeah.
All this is just going to decay and then settle to the bottom.
That's what will happen. Yeah. So one of the things we have to do in the early fall before the water gets too cold, because you sure don't want to be in a pond when the water temperature is 50 degrees. You want to do it, you know, before the temperature drops around 60.
Okay.
Once the temperature drops down and then this stuff rots or it gets cold, and then they're going to sink and they're going to go to the bottom of the pond, and then it's going to be a big mess, and it's going to actually have a problem with dissolved oxygen in the water for the winter.
Like we talked about this being a top pond, we have a return that's over there, if you can see real closely. That's where the water is coming to from the bottom of the other pond, so you get that continuous circulating motion with it.
This is a closed system.
When selling your home, you want it to look its very best. You also want the very best realtors at your side, Tom and Marilyn Adams. The Adams will assist you from start to finish. They process both buying and selling, and they'll even help with relocation from outside the area. As agents for buyers and sellers, their MLS membership allows them to work with any resident or business in the region. Having lived here all their lives, the Adams are familiar with the Tennessee-Virginia region. So if you're buying or selling, contact Tom and Marilyn Adams. They're not just agents, they're realtors.
Your wedding should be a very special time. Don't let the hassles of planning it take that away. Action Rentals can take care of all of your wedding rental needs. We've got everything from fountains to table settings to ice bowls. And if it's an outdoor wedding you want, don't worry about rain. We've got tents that can accommodate any size guest list. And while you're there, be sure you and your fiancé check out all of our equipment rentals for after the honeymoon. Everything you need is at Action Reynolds, located at 1861 Northeastman Road in Kingsport.
Enjoy beautiful fall color and plenty of shade every summer with the huge shipment of shade trees now in stock at Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace. Choose from high-quality maples, flowering pears, clump birches, sweet gums, weeping willows, pin oaks, and many more. These 6 to 8 foot shade trees are guaranteed to grow, starting at just $29.99. Get Evergreen's extended 18-month warranty free with your purchase of root stimulator and planting mix to get your tree started right. Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace now in 4 locations: Kingsport, Colonial Heights, Bristol, and on the web at egardenplace.com. Come to Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace for colorful pansy power. Choose the really big, majestic giants for blooms up to 4 inches across. How about Evergreen's all-time favorite, bingo pansies with a garden full of bright pansy faces? Or cheerful violas or Johnny jump-ups, just like in Grandma's country garden. And the all-new baby bingos that combine bingo's faces with viola's hardiness. Feed them with Fertilome rooting and blooming mix for color this fall, winter, and spring, too. It's pansy power for 3 seasons of color from Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace.
Welcome back to Gardens Growplace. Can you believe all these plants came from 2 small plants early in the spring? Look at that gorgeous bloom. And you know, these plants are a perfect playground for the koi. They'll splash around the roots, they'll get in there and they'll actually eat some of the roots, they'll eat some of the plants, they'll help keep the bugs and the insects out of the water. You won't have any mosquito problems if you have some koi in your pond. They love the bugs, and you can actually back way off on the food for the summer if you've got plenty of plants in the pond too.
Mike, I would think that this temperature of the water gets up probably in the 80s during the summertime, but I'm going to guess it's about 70 degrees. At what point do you determine when do you start feeding fish a little bit less or maybe a different kind of food?
During the summer, the koi need a high protein food. That'll help them actually grow and build strong bones and all the things you hear about Wonder Bread on TV. But in the fall, they'll need more of a high carbohydrate diet because they're trying to store fat, because they're going to have about 3 months through the winter when the water's so cool that their digestive system slows way down. So you'll want to switch to an autumn food. When the water temperature gets around 40 degrees or so, you'll even want to stop feeding them.
We've looked at how we got the pond to where it is today, but we want to make sure that we get this pond cleaned up for our winter time. Mike, first step is to remove these water hyacinths and lettuce and get rid of them. we've turned the pump off. When we removed all those water plants, then we sort of messed up all of the silt that was in there. And boy, if you reach down at the bottom, I want to show you what, look at all that sort of settles on the bottom. And that's what you have to do in the late fall season, is make sure that we get as much of this out as we can, because we don't want that buildup to be in the bottom of that pond. Mike, did it stop the filter up?
Let's take a look at this pump too, since we got it off. Look at that, oh my goodness. Now all this, look at the stuff on the top of this lid. This is all over the bottom of the pond too, and if you don't get that out of the pond, it's gonna rot through the winter, it's gonna use up all the oxygen in the water, it's gonna choke and smother your fish, and it's just gonna cause havoc with green algae in the spring. So this is what we gotta get off. Now, what we have in this pond is actually a pre-filter. You can see all the holes. This is a 5-gallon bucket that's been modified as a pre-filter. Now what we want to do is protect the intake of this pump. You can see how clogged this is, but not with any big rocks or anything. It's just pieces of root that have gone through those little holes in the top of the lid. Now you got to make sure, if you're going to do one of these yourself, that you make sure the holes are small enough and that there's plenty of holes, because a pump this size could pump potentially 50 gallons a minute if all the tubing and things are clear.
Mike, you're going to get a whole lot of debris that's going to settle that you don't want to get into that pump. So if you take a regular pond net and, number one, skim the stuff off the top, the old silt and the residue, but you can go along the bottom of the pond and you can get up a lot of the old dead stuff. You can see what's going to be on there. Some rocks too. Those came probably off the top of the plants. And the koi fish, as they have worked throughout the summertime, it sort of kicked those off. So you want to get all this stuff off the bottom of the pond, and then we're going to take that pond vacuum and to be able to get some of the fine silt out of there.
That's right. You can use a pond vacuum. You can actually use your pump. If you've got plenty of tubing, you can move it slowly along the bottom of the pond. But like Henry said, you got to make sure you get the big rocks out, because they'll damage your impeller. We're going to pump about 50% of the water out. We're going to remove the dissolved organics that you can't see, but that'll actually be in the water that'll make your algae grow.
We're also going to take the hardy water plants and set them up on the edge so we can prune those back. We'll take both of those steps, show you how to do those, so you'll have a beautiful pond next spring. We'll be right back for more of Gardener's Grow Place.
Enjoy beautiful fall color and plenty of shade every summer with the huge shipment of shade trees now in stock at Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace. Choose from high-quality maples, flowering pears, clump birches, sweet gums, weeping willows, pin oaks, and many more. These 6 to 8 foot shade trees are guaranteed to grow, starting at just $29.99. Get Evergreen's extended 18-month warranty free with your purchase of root stimulator and planting mix to get your tree started right. Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace now in 4 locations: Kingsport, Colonial Heights, Bristol, and on the web at egardenplace.com. Come to Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace for colorful pansy power. Choose the really big, majestic giants for blooms up to 4 inches across. How about Evergreen's all-time favorite, bingo pansies with a garden full of bright pansy faces, or cheerful violas or Johnny jump-ups just like in Grandma's country garden, and the all-new baby bingos that combine bingo's faces with viola's hardiness. Feed them with Fertilome rooting and blooming mix for color this fall, winter, and spring too. It's pansy power for 3 seasons of color from Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace. When selling your home, you want it to look its very best. You also want the very best realtors at your side, Tom and Marilyn Adams. The Adams will assist you from start to finish. They process both buying and selling, and they'll even help with relocation from outside the area. As agents for buyers and sellers, their MLS membership allows them to work with any residents or business in the region. Having lived here all their lives, the Adams are familiar with the Tennessee-Virginia region. So if you're buying or selling, contact Tom and Marilyn Adams. They're not just agents, they're realtors.
Your wedding should be a very special time. Don't let the hassles of planning it take that away. Action Rentals can take care of all of your wedding rental needs. We've got everything from fountains to table settings to ice bowls. And if it's an outdoor wedding you want, don't worry about rain. We've got tents that can accommodate any size guest list. And while you're there, be sure you and your fiancé check out all of our equipment rentals for after the honeymoon. Everything you need is at Action Rentals, located at 1861 North Eastman Road in Kingsport.
While we're pumping the water out to do our water change, I'm going to use this pond vac, and this works by actually hooking to a garden hose, and it'll kind of pump some water in as it works, but it's sucking up all the stuff on the bottom of the pond You can see all of the detritus and stuff that it's
a lot of debris in there. Yeah, look at that.
I've only used it for a minute or two. Look at all the stuff that's already picked up.
That's off the bottom that you really can't pick up with your hands.
Right, you can't pick it up with your hands. It's too fine to go through a net, but it's going to be there for next spring to make you have green water.
It's much easier to trim back these plants when you get them up on the edge of the ledge. You see, all we're really doing is trimming this off because all the old foliage that's here is going to actually decay in the wintertime if we leave it in the water, and that's going to build up our residue in the bottom. It's going to hurt our fish. So just trim these off, and then we're going to place this back down in the water where we have at least 24 to 30 inches of water. Just set it right back down. Mike, what other plants do you have there?
Let's take a look at this plant. You've cut it back, you think the job is done, but you can see these big roots sticking out of the pot. It would be better to move this whole thing into a half bushel or maybe a bushel basket sized pot. Now what you have to remember with containers, this is a standard nursery pot. And yeah, it's got some holes in the bottom, but it's not going to allow a good flow of water through the pot. And you can get some anaerobic areas down in there, those foul smelling, the kind of sulfur smell, kind of smells like a reeking swamp. That's a problem with this kind of pot. This is a far superior type of pot. Look at the holes in the side. That allows for a good air, water, moisture. It can all go through those holes. You can see a plant like this one, it's actually taking advantage of all of that, and it's grown right out the holes. This iris is overdue for a shift of potting up right. You've got a couple of choices. You can leave these roots on. They're actually filtering the water, but if you decide it's just time to pot the plant up, and it probably would be best to do that in the spring, then you're going to have to get the pot off somehow. You can try to cut it and save as many of the roots as possible, but the roots are what feeding the plant.
But many times you're not going to be able to salvage that pot.
Probably not. I think it's to the point where you're going to have to cut that one off.
Okay.
This floating hearts, you can see how much it's grown, and if you look at the pile of greenery behind me, you can see how incredibly those water hyacinths and the water lettuce took off. But look at all of that Henry pulled off of there. It's just unbelievable. When you're pruning a plant, you don't want to get down to the growing point. And what I'm talking about, especially on the water on the water lilies, is this root has a root end and it has a growing point where the plant grows from. So if you cut that off, you're going to be damaging its future development. You're better off, if you want to divide it, break large sections of the roots off, make sure you don't disturb the growing point. That's plenty close enough for pruning for this one for the fall.
Yeah, you can almost feel where it bends almost like a joint in your arm. So this one, I could just break this one off or cut it off and then repot that down to about this level, and that's going to re-root again, and it'll be warm enough in the bottom of that soil, in the bottom of the water, to do some root growth over the wintertime.
You can see the large rocks that we've got on top of here. This is to keep the koi from disturbing the soil, and they're bottom feeders and they're rooters, and they're going to get in there and they're going to dig all the soil out of your pots if you're not careful. Little tiny pebbles just are not going to cut it, and that's what's going to get in your pump. So use great big pieces or at least 1-inch size rock and leave a couple of inches when you do finish potting. You can see how far down this is. You want to fill that up with a good bit of rock because that's what's going to keep your koi from getting that root zone. Depending on what kind of hardy plants that you have, they're going to have different types of foliage. The fan-like blades of an iris, or the tube-like structures of a rush, or the pithy type of foliage that you get when you're cutting back water lilies. You still want to remove all that green growth. All the stuff I'm cutting off now, once you put it in a deep part of the water, because they're marginal in nature, it will rot. They're not going to get enough sunlight to live, and the water will be much cooler. Now the roots, on the other hand, they're fine. You don't have to cut the roots off unless you decide you're going to do some repotting. But you can see I'm just trimming off reasonably close to the pot. Anything you do leave is going to rot. So you want to get as much of it off as you can. And like I said, leaving all that stuff in the pond and just worrying about it in the spring is a bad idea because it never fails. The biggest, prettiest fish that you have are the first ones to succumb from low oxygen levels. So we really want to make sure that we get give them as much of a chance as we can. If your pond is, say, 2 feet deep or so, it's plenty deep enough for most hardy plants. You want to just sink these to the deepest part of the pond for the winter.
We're going to finish trimming off this plant. Mike, I think we can just set all these off in the pond. Let me hand these to you.
Okay.
You can just put those all in one cluster. That way in the spring season, we'll know where all these are.
All right. Now, this is a pretty good deep pond, so we should have no trouble with these plants for the winter time. Let's just set these down in there.
We're going to set the rest of the plants in. We'll be right back for more of Gardener's Growplace.
Come to Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace for colorful pansy power. Choose the really big, majestic giants for blooms up to 4 inches across. How about Evergreen's all-time favorite, bingo pansies with a garden full of bright pansy faces? Or cheerful violas or Johnny jump-ups, just like in Grandma's country garden. And the all-new baby bingos that combine bingo's faces with viola's hardiness. Feed them with Fertilome rooting and blooming mix for color this fall, winter, and spring, too. It's pansy power for 3 seasons of color from Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace. Enjoy beautiful fall color and plenty of shade every summer with the huge shipment of shade trees now in stock at Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace. Choose from high-quality maples, flowering pears, clump birches, sweet gums, weeping willows, pin oaks, and many more. These 6 to 8 foot shade trees are guaranteed to grow, starting at just $29.99. Get Evergreen's extended 18-month warranty free with your purchase of root stimulator and planting mix to get your tree started right. Evergreen Home and Garden Showplace now in 4 locations: Kingsport, Colonial Heights, Bristol, and on the web at egardenplace.com.
Welcome back to Gardener's Growplace. You can see what a pile of green garbage we have there. Those are the water hyacinths, the water lettuce, the water lilies that we cut off and we stacked up there. If we left all of that in the pond in the late fall and we didn't clean that up, that's just going to rot and decay and settle in our pond. That's where we're going to get that green soupiness next spring season. That's what we don't want.
It's incredible to imagine all that green growing out of the nutrients that were in this pond. So if we remove it in the fall, we'll save ourselves a lot of work in the spring. One thing to remember, after you've done your water change and after you've completely cleaned as much of the stuff out as you can, make sure you check your filter a few times and that pump intake, because it'll start to get clogged that you've done all this disturbing stuff.
Ponds are easy to take care of. The splashing water, the noise, looking at the fish while you feed them, those are all great attributes of ponds. They take a little bit of care in the fall season, a little bit in the spring season. Follow these tips and you'll have clear, fun ponds. Thanks for watching Gardener's Growplace.
Gardener's Growplace is a Harris Television production.